My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
George Clooney and Brad Pitt's new movie Wolves is on Apple TV Plus September 27th.
That's where I want you to be now.
So if you want to see George Clooney and Brad Pitt, go to Apple TV Plus.
You got to start the story there.
Or if you want to see Brad Pitt and George Clooney, go to Apple TV Plus.
I am enjoying the show.
And if you want to see their new movie Wolves,
you can't do it, I'm going to help you out. I can do it. So do it.
Definitely go to Apple TV Plus.
Admit it, it's cool. Okay, fine, it was very cool.
Wolves, streaming September 27th on Apple TV Plus. Rated R.
Today on the Film and Whiskey Podcast, Bob is flying solo. I'm here to talk crap about Brad G and also talk with my new friends at Blackwood Distilling Company. That's all ahead on the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome into the Film and Whiskey Podcast. I'm Bob Book, and I am flying solo today. Hopefully, I don't get pushback from our guests today, because it's really nice to not have to argue with Brad for a change. Brad is on vacation, a well-earned few days off from the podcast before we jump into Season 9, which is kicking off next Tuesday. If you heard our Season 9 preview, you know that our first film for Season 9 is going to be Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. So join us for that next Tuesday. But before we get into that, I wanted to bring some guests on to talk about a new brand of whiskey that you may have heard us plugging recently. We've been sponsored by a company called Blackwood Distilling Co. They're going to continue sponsoring a segment of the show throughout Season 9. And folks, first of all, I got to tell you, the whiskey is just fantastic. Brad and I have visited their operation down in Versailles, Kentucky. We've been tasting through all their new batches, as well as some potential single barrels that they're going to release. And I could not be more hyped about this brand, specifically because they were smart enough, wise enough to hire our good friend, Zach Johnston. Zach's hanging out here on the other end of the line. We'll bring him in first. Zach, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Bob. I'm happy to be back and say hello to the Film and Whiskey files out there.
This has got to be what, like appearance number 7 for you now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a few years too. Like we've been doing this, we've been friends for a while now. So yeah. I feel comfortable, shooting the shit about good whiskey and good movies.
I mean, you're getting close to just being like the official third chair here on Film and Whiskey. So,
oh no.
Yeah, I know you seem bummed about that. But you've also brought along another friend today. It's new to the podcast, but not new to Brad and I. It's our good friend, Guinness McFadden. Guinness, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bob. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. It's been a couple weeks since we were hanging out, getting slightly toasty in the middle of the day, sampling some barrels. Guinness, our audience is not familiar with you, so I'll turn it over to you. Who are you and what are you doing here?
Who am I? I'm Guinness. Guinness McFadden. I was born in Northern California on my family's farm. He grows grapes and herbs and raises cattle. And I moved to Kentucky in 2004 to get into the horse business. I worked for Three Chimneys Farm for 11 years before I started my own training center called Blackwood Stables. And that's kind of where the name starts. We named the bourbon after my horse farm. And yeah, that's kind of the start of the story. As far as the starting the bourbon goes, it was during COVID in 2020 when my buddy Justin Thompson of Justin's House of Bourbon, we have lunch fairly frequently, and he was like, "Hey man, we're gonna go grab lunch." So we're sitting out on the sidewalk here in Lexington, and from under the table he pulled out this bottle, and he's like, "Look at this." I was like, "What is that?" and it was their own kind of house bourbon. And I was like super intrigued. You did that? How did you do that? And that was the start of it. Just two guys having a beer and me being super curious. I'd been a bourbon drinker for quite some time. It's hard not to be living in Kentucky. Horses and bourbon go together like peas and carrots. So it just seemed like a natural transition from that conversation. We, had more conversations, and Justin Sloan got involved, and one thing led to another, and then I, made a phone call to a couple friends, and they were like, "Yeah, that doesn't sound like a terrible idea. We'll give you some cash." So we, raised a few bucks and bought some barrels, and here we are.
So that's the beginning of the company, 2020. Zach, you just came on in your capacity in the last couple months at Blackwood. So maybe we should honor next week's Christopher Nolan episode, and let's do two timelines at once, and we'll meet back in the middle here. What was your first exposure to Blackwood, and how did they entice you into this lucrative job that you have now?
So I was actually also friends with Justin Thompson, funnily enough. And, we'd met a few times through Justin's House of Bourbon. And one day Justin just called me up. He's like, "Hey, I hear you're going to be in Kentucky. I'm working on this new project. Would you like to, drop in? I'd love to have you taste it." I'm like, "Yeah, of course, dude." And I met up with Justin and Sloan, and they took me over to meet Guinness at the Versailles warehouse. And we tried that batch one of the bourbon and the rye, and I was blown away. And I think I wrote about it immediately and, gave it really high marks. And I think I gave, the bourbon and the rye, put them in, my best of the year that year as well. And then just like the relationship carried on for the next couple of years. Like I moved to Kentucky in the summer of 2022, and which made it easier to just like drop in. So, JT or Sloan would, ring me up and be like, "Hey, do you want to drop in the warehouse? We're doing a barrel pick," or, you just want to come try our new batch or what have you. And, started a relationship with Guinness, of course, through that as well. And then, I had moved to Kentucky to get into the industry, eventually on the industry side as opposed to the media side. As 8 years working in online media is, almost inexplicable that I survived waves and waves of buyouts and layoffs and changes and economic recoveries, presidents, etc. I think this spring, through a friend of ours, started having a conversation about, what we could do with Blackwood and how we could, help the brand from where it is now to, take it into the future with the expansion of both Blackwood, but also moving towards a distillery project. And it just worked out in a way that it felt right because, again, I go back to that September 2021 when I first met Guinness and first tried Blackwood. Like I was sold from the first sip. I mean, you can tell instantly that they were working on something that was special. It was unique. And, I've only been even more enthralled with the product as it has developed over the last 3 years as well, including up into what we're doing now. Was what drew me in the most was not just, "Oh yeah, let's do some whiskey together." Like, literally hundreds of other people are doing. Let's do something really special.
Well, I think that's my follow-up question here. And you guys, what I've really appreciated about you and getting to spend time with you is not just the no frills nature of the operation, but the complete kind of transparency that you guys have given us a peek behind the curtain with everything. And I think one thing that we've really hammered home on this podcast is that the average consumer of bourbon and rye has become significantly more familiar with what to look for on the bottle copy, and they want transparency. And so, my big question to you guys, if you're willing to go here with me, is like, you guys are starting a brand and, Guinness, this is 4 years in for you, so it probably doesn't feel quite like the start, but we're becoming familiar with you 4 years on. And there's rumblings of, is there a bubble? Is the bubble going to pop? What's happening with all of these smaller producers and distilleries? I guess my question to you guys is, what gives you confidence in the specific angle that you're taking with your products? And why do you think that that's going to become bubble proof, for lack of a better term?
I was just talking about this morning.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch how different places have built different brands over the last number of years and what the end goals were. And I think what we've tried to do is not make it to make it all about the whiskey, not trying to build a company that's going to be sold immediately or ever sold. This is a long-term play, and it's not a flip. So I think that's maybe one thing that is a little bit different about what we're trying to do versus what I've seen. We're not trying to rush to put 10 SKUs out onto the shelf to make ourselves more appealing for purchase from private equity or big bourbon, which I think in turn makes our product so much better when we're trying to put out the best product possible and then figure out how to make it profitable versus trying to make money first and then worrying about whether or not it's a good product in the bottle. There is definitely, I don't want to say a saturation in the over $100 market, but you can't just put a big price point on a bottle and say, here you go, right? It's taken brands a long time to get to that point. You know, Pappy didn't just like become something. It's been around for a very, very long time. So you had asked earlier about how we had gotten to our price point, but we literally just looked through the marketplace and said, what is our competition? You know, who are we competing against? You know, we're a barrel strength 8-year bourbon, ultra small batch, secondary finished. The most expensive thing you can do to bourbon is put it in the barrel is the most expensive part of the whole process, obviously outside of the distillery, but the barrel is the most expensive component going into the production. And we're putting it in a second barrel. So that's not necessarily doubling cost, but from a production standpoint, it is almost doubling cost. And then you get into the barrel strength realm. And I think all of these things just led us to, we're in a north of $100 price point, south of 200. Where do we fit in there? And you kind of look around the marketplace, and we didn't want to be the most expensive for sure. We wanted to have some value there still. So we came up with that, you know, depending on where you are, it's going to be anywhere from 150 to 165 bucks for the rye and the bourbon. And then the single barrels are a little bit more, but yeah, that's kind of the thought process on how we got through that.
Well, and I was going to say, you know, we have a category when we score whiskeys on the podcast. We always talk about value, and Brad and I usually take a different kind of tack with that. And Brad is just based on the taste. Would I pay this amount of money for this whiskey? And I'm more of a, does this price point make sense given the market? Like whether or not I like it, is it a good value based on where the competition is? And I think between the two of us, first of all, we've both established, like, we think that Blackwood is more than fairly priced because it's delicious stuff. But you're absolutely right. I mean, with the barrel finishes and everything else, it's set exactly where it needs to be. I've never felt like you guys are overpriced or anything like that. And to your point, they're not, I mean, I'm not saying it's not done, but you can't just be like, hey, how great would our margins be if we took this bottle of whiskey that should be $30 and just charged $105 for it? Like, eventually the market's going to find you out a little bit. And so I think that as we start to see some of these other non-distilling producers, small distilleries kind of fall away or have to readjust their prices, I really think Blackwood has been set up for success because you guys have priced this super fairly, especially with everything that you do and what's in the bottle. And Zach, I didn't mean to cut you off. I know you wanted to say something here.
No, I mean, I agree with your point there where, you know, like I said earlier, as soon as you put that whiskey to your lips, you understand where that money's going. But I also think, you know, we're in a very unique position where you look at like a lot of what's happening in American whiskey, not really a bubble per se. You know, the fact that the tariffs were dropped in 2021 was the real driver of why the economy of spirits sort of blew up when it did. COVID, yes, had a part of that. But what you're looking at also is like, okay, you have between like 2019 and 2021, all these people coming into American spirits, American whiskey especially, you know, that's 5-6 years ago now. Those people who were maybe 25 are now in their early 30s and they're making more money. They've had this, you know, 5-6 year window of education. And yes, they probably, you know, started off, you know, listening to people like, you know, me or you and be like, hey, Evan Williams bottled and bond is 17, well, back then, $15. You know, that's a good starter point. But year after year, they've probably advanced up. And so you have this whole generation of people who came in around 2020 who are now advanced whiskey drinkers. Mm-hmm. You know, even if only half of them made it to that, and half of them stayed with their, JTS Brown bonded or their Evan Williams bonded. Even if half of those people have advanced, that's a large part of the whiskey drinking community in America who are looking for and can appreciate a luxury product like this, where it's like, hey, yeah, maybe I could buy 10 bottles of Evan bonded for $150, or I can get a $150 bottle of whiskey and just, very much, be nourishing with it for a month and enjoy that. Because, maybe I'm not getting drunk like I used to when I was 25, or maybe, like all these variables come into play. So it's always sort of in these cycles, right? So, and that's what we see in the marketplace. Luxury whiskey isn't taking a hit like the craft whiskey is, or like the other non-producing distillers. Luxury whiskey is actually going up right now in sales because I believe part of that is the consumer base is maturing.
Yeah.
And will continue to mature. I mean, millennials are going to be 50 here in a couple of years. You know what I mean? And, they have
why don't you just say more depressing things on our podcast today? My gosh, man.
But, that means there's more wealth in that generation now to also pay for things. Whereas 10 years ago, we're looking at 2015, when you had the start of the boom, people cared about, 101, and they cared about JTS Brown bonded and stuff like that because that's all they could afford. Well, that's 10 years ago. Things have changed.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the product lineup. And Guinness, you kind of tossed me up a lob here. You guys aren't doing 10 SKUs right now. You've got a batched toasted bourbon, a batch toasted rye, and then a single barrel of each. So my question to you, Guinness, is like, why toasted? How did you land on toasted barrel stuff? Was it just kind of what your flavor preferred wheelhouse was, or was it, hey, there's kind of a void in the market here that I think we can fill? A little bit of both?
I would love to take all that credit, but I can't. That was JT and Sloan's suggestion, and the best explanation I can give is with the limited amount of resources, comparatively speaking, that we were going to work with. The way you can play with isn't the right term, but the way you can alter or adjust or improve with toasting, I think just made it really good for us. So we could get the flavor profile we were looking for, versus we just didn't have access to 20,000 barrels, one of these larger distilleries. Yeah, you can just roll through the warehouse and pick the good stuff and it's no problem. But we felt like it just gave us a little bit more control over the product, and we could get the flavor profile exactly where we wanted it to be. And with the barrel strength, that's kind of what I like to drink. And I think what some of us like to drink. And we kind of joke that we made this for us. We hope you like it. And that's really how this came about, was trying to create something that we liked, and hopefully the market would appreciate it.
Is the R&D on toasted finished stuff, like, how frustrating is that process? I have to imagine, because you've already said the barrel's the most expensive thing, right? So now we're getting barrels in and we're trying to figure out exactly what toast level or char level to finish this in. I imagine you have to be going through tons of whiskey, quite a few barrels before you finally hit on that like alchemy of what you wanted.
The playbook was somewhat written for toasted bourbon. So we had a general idea of the parameters we should stay in, but then Sloan and JT had some other ideas about finishes on these finishing barrels and mixtures that we were going to use and ratios. And we just took a shot in the dark. I shouldn't say a shot in the dark. We took a very educated guess, and on our first batch of bourbon, and we nailed it. But it was, and the first time, second time, third time we did it, first time we did it, it's pulling samples weekly, right? Second time we did it, it's pulling samples every other week. And then the third time we did it, we kind of knew what to expect. So trial and error on the bourbon. The rye was something totally different. We had no expectation of what to do there. There weren't very many people doing it. We couldn't we didn't know. So we definitely ruined some barrels. I think we ruined some barrels. It did not have we couldn't get the same results from what we did with the bourbon on the rye. So we ended up triple barreling when we didn't get what we were looking for out of either the char 4 or the medium toast. We would then put it in just the opposite. If we had put it in medium toast, then we would put it in char 4 again. and definitely not the most efficient thing. A lot of loss there, but we were looking for a particular profile, and I think we nailed it again. It's really good, and we kind of have a little bit of a roadmap there. Not all of them are triple barreled; they don't all need it. These barrels are all so individually unique. I think I read somewhere that you get 30 trees could create 30 different trees could go into the making of a barrel. So,
Wow.
all of them are very, very unique. Yeah. Trial and error. I mean, the bourbon was definitely a good learning experience. I mean, shoot, just how to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you transfer the barrels? How do you get it from one barrel to the next? What's the most efficient way to do it? How many people do you need to do it? How much time does it take? How long do you leave it in for? What do you do with it afterwards? Because that's the thing, the bourbon changes so quickly, and the rye changes so quickly in those barrels that you can't leave it in. Like with a regular 8-year barrel, you're like, okay, that's ready, and you can leave it in the warehouse for a month and come back to it when you're ready. You cannot walk away from these. They will go and cook way further than you would like. So, I mean, we have to tank them. Like right when they're ready, we tank them. Like 2 days would be longer than I would like to wait. Like
wow.
we pull them, we taste them, we like them, we put them in a stainless tank immediately. And then we get to blending. We'll keep all of these barrels as single barrels throughout the toasting process, and then we'll tank them in stainless drums, and then we can go through and pull samples and see which ones are going to be best for the blend. We can do the sample blend, and then which are going to be best for single barrels, and go from there. So it's pretty good. It's like a kid in a candy store if you like this kind of stuff.
Well, guys, I have to say, my day job, I work in marketing, and anytime I'm working with a brand that has multiple products being offered, you try your best not to do it, but inevitably you end up talking about the one that you like the most. And Brad and I were driving home from the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, a week ago, and just talking about, dude, how good is that toasted rye? Like it's so good. And Brad is such a huge rye drinker. So for me to get on board with the toasted rye, I think that like the bourbon is fantastic, but I don't really know of anybody out there. And I'm sure you guys have done your market research better than me, but I don't know anybody out there that's really doing toasted barrel finished rye, especially at the level that you guys are doing it. And the marketer in me is like, you're always looking for the UVP. Like, what's the unique value proposition here? And it's like, they have the market cornered on toasted rye. If you are looking for a super unique rye, especially with the triple barreled thing that you guys mentioned, nobody's doing it like Blackwood. And so that's my recommendation, first of all, but it's also my segue into asking you guys, what is coming down the pike? Where can we currently find what you're selling? And then maybe tease something that's coming soon.
So we've got locations first. So we've got a little thing on our website where you can go and find out where we are in Kentucky. We've just moved into Florida. Zach, correct me here, but I believe we are in the Fort Lauderdale area. We're in the Tampa area, Jacksonville, Naples. We're trying to update our map so you can actually see where it is, but we're working on that.
Wow.
So we're in a few spots in Florida, and then I think we've sent 100 cases or so down there, so it's not nothing. And then just the last couple of weeks, we've gone to Texas. We're in the Dallas area. I believe we're going to be in the Houston area. Zach, is that
Yes,
Dallas,
sir.
Houston, and then a spot or two in Austin also. So Florida, Texas, Kentucky. We've just gotten into Wyoming. We'll be in the Wyoming market and going to the Seattle area soon. So a couple markets that we're slowly getting into. And as far as new product lines, we are going to hopefully here in the next, we're actually transferring barrels on Tuesday. We're going to be doing what we're calling a toasted 105 in both bourbon and rye. So it's going to be a similar blend to our barrel strength products, but a slightly larger batch. Try to get a little bit more continuity there. I think what makes our products now so appealing is they are a little bit unique from batch to batch. But as we grow, we would like to get a little bit more continuity in the batches. So a slightly larger batch at 105 proof. We went through from about 110 proof to 5 to 100 to 95 to 90. And, right or wrong, I think everybody on the team prefers drinking higher proof. So we settled on 105. It was a nice spot to be in. We're super pumped about the product. So hopefully here in the early part of November before Thanksgiving, we will be out and about with that. And invariably, there'll probably be some single barrels that get pulled off of that also. But Toasted 105 coming at you.
Well, guys, I can't thank you enough for sitting down with me today. We look forward to working with you here in the future. But for real, guys, toasted rye, toasted bourbon. If you have not tried that category before, I cannot give a higher recommendation than Blackwood Distilling. Guys, any last insults you want to hurl at Brad before we sign off for the day? Any comments about his height?
It's just such a Brad move not to be here.
Yeah, dude, you're telling me. All right. Well, Zach and Guinness, thank you guys again. Where can we find Blackwood to purchase it?
A couple places. Bourbonoutfitter.com online if you're not in Kentucky, Florida, or Texas. Or take a peek at the website for our locator. You can always send us a message on Instagram or Facebook. Say, I live here. Where can I find it? And also pester your local liquor store. Let them know. Say, hey, got to get the Blackwood in here. You guys are letting us down. Help us out.
Exactly.
All right, guys, we'll be back next week, kicking off season 9 with Oppenheimer. But until then, I'm Bob Book, and we'll see you next time.